I am a single parent coach. I'm in Illinois, which is like 2 hours south of Chicago. So like she said, it's 2 p.m. now. So after this, I get to hop off of here and go grab my kids from school and do our nightly routine. But today I really wanted to focus on a couple of ideas that one of the people from Frollo reached out to me about. And it was this idea of what's like the initial impact when you first become a single parent or a co-parent, that separation process, talk through some of the relationship myths that we all tend to believe, and then kind of redefining the relationship you have with yourself, with your kids, and with your co-parent. And I'm going to try my best to do that all in 30 minutes. But I love interacting with people. So if you have a question, if you have an idea, go ahead and add that in or ask me while I'm talking. I'm not going to get upset or offended. I really like interacting and working off of questions as well. And then if you have any questions for the end, we can definitely, I can answer those and we can talk about those at the end. But, the first idea is that initial impact of the breakup, of the separation, or of the divorce. And I can tell you from personal experience, I remember when, like, I have a very unique story, but when co-parenting started for me, I just remember thinking that like life was over. Like life just felt like I had ruined it in every way possible, right? I thought that the choices that I had made and the way that things were happening were going to ruin things for me. That like this future, these ideas that I had, these hopes and dreams that were all crashed, and were just all like I had messed up everything. And I remember holding on to that weight, holding on to those thoughts, and holding on to that and trying to carry it by myself. And what ended up happening was that over the course of a couple of weeks, like everything just felt so heavy. Like it would impact like regular conversations I would have at work. It would impact conversations I was having, with my friends, or, with my family. And people could start to tell that something was up, but nobody really knew, right? Nobody could read my mind. Nobody could understand exactly what I was feeling because I wasn't sharing it with anybody. And I think that one of the biggest things that can come out of this, and what I learned and as a coach, what I really help other people with, is this idea that you need to find somebody, whether that's yourself in journal form, or a close friend, or in a coach, or in a mentor, not trying to carry that weight by yourself. Because for me, it very much impacted who I was. And when you're trying to get through this, for me, it was learning how to co-parent. I had always dreamed of trying to make it work, trying to become this two-parent household, trying to become this thing that I didn't have a lot of practice with. I was raised by a single mom, so even the idea of knowing how to two-parent, I'd be part of a two-parent household, two-parent team, was something that I didn't even know how to do. So sharing that, like nothing changed for me until I actually shared it with my mom. And I'll always remember the fact that the most simple thing that she could have said was what she said. And she just told me like, hey, like, it's going to be okay. Like, we'll figure it out and you'll make the best of it. And I remember just thinking just how simple and silly that sounded, but it was exactly what I needed to hear. So it was this idea that like, okay, in my mind, I had built it up as like this, my life is over, that nothing's ever going to be good again, that, how could I have possibly gotten myself into this situation? Why did I do this? In my mind, those scenarios were they were all like catastrophic. It was like pouring gasoline on an already blazing fire. And when I kept them in my head, it just got bigger and bigger and was burning more and more to the ground. And it wasn't until I shared it with somebody that like I kind of, put some water on it, and it started going out, and it started becoming a bit more manageable. And then as I started putting steps in place to be a bit more involved and to help myself out in the situation, that flame really started to die down. But it wasn't until I really reached out to somebody and let somebody else in and let somebody else help me out. Because this is the time you don't want to be alone. You don't want to, well, you might feel like you want to be alone, but the best way to get through it is not to be alone. And to me, that really leads into some relationship myths that we believe in our societies. And a big part of that comes from even just, the vows that people say in a wedding, right? The vows that people say of like, I will cherish you through sickness and health. I will no matter what, be there for you. We promise all of these things. We make a vow to this other person, but a lot of the things that we say in the vows were actually built from like 15th century ideology. So even in this sense that, yes, we want to carry on healthy relationships and we want to carry on healthy marriages, but a lot of what we think that we're promising to the other person isn't something that many of us learn how to do. And some of the myths that come about from that is this idea that you have to sacrifice yourself in order for the relationship to work, or not, put boundaries in place in a healthy relationship, that if you are in love, that love will conquer all, that love will be enough, that if you're in love, that you don't have to continue to do the work. And I will adamantly go against that, in the sense that if you're in love, that means you are doing the work, right? You are putting yourself in a very vulnerable position. And when you put yourself in a vulnerable position, you have to continue to do the work to make sure that you are protected, that the other person sees that, the other person respects that. And if that person isn't able to do that, then you take steps in order to make things better. So what I really like to focus on in coaching, as far as breaking down those myths, is that at some point in the relationship, we started telling ourselves some falsehoods to continue the relationship, or to make it seem like the relationship was going better. And some of those things might be that people who are in love stay together no matter what, that like divorce isn't an option, that co-parenting isn't an option. So you become less of yourself. And I think that one of the most powerful things that happens is that once you really start building yourself up again after a divorce or a separation, is that you realize that when you have love, you're actually operating out of a place of abundance. And for me, abundance means that there's always going to be more, that you can keep growing, that you can have more. And if you're in a relationship that you are scared to do that, if you're scared to grow, if you're scared to ask for new things, if you're operating out of a place of fear, then you're not really going to be who you need to be. So a big relationship myth is that you stop growing, or that you stop caring, or that the love dies, or that the love, fades. And I think that what happens is the love just changes. And if we're not able to change with it, then that's what leads to some of the deterioration that comes with this. And once we're free from that, once we are out of that relationship, and once we are able to start focusing on ourselves again, that's where the redefining part comes in. And the redefining the part is really pretty amazing, because in that sense of being able to redefine yourself, you get to look back on all the things that you were missing out on. For me, a lot of what I work on with my coaching clients goes all the way back to how things were as a child. Like what were your parents like? How did they treat you? Were they people who really lifted you up and made you feel heard, made you feel seen, made you feel valued? Or did you feel like you had to earn their love? Did you feel like you had to, do things to garner their respect? Was their love conditional? And what we find is that once we start looking into that and really start peeling back some of those layers on how childhood was, we learn that we were actually looking for that same thing in our partner, right? If we didn't get it from our parents, a lot of times a partner is where we will try to make up that void. So if we really wanted to earn our parents' praise and respect and love, but we never got it, then we will start doing that with our partner. That will want to hear those things, I love you, I'm proud of you. I respect you from from our partner. So what needs to start happening is when you start redefining your relationship with yourself, you need to learn how to give those things to yourself. So you need to learn how to validate yourself. You need to learn how to see yourself in all that you are, and maybe some things that you didn't like before you realize are actual strengths. People that I work with now, it's like, they were too emotional, or they were too empathetic, and they were too caring, and that would get them into, arguments or disagreements in their marriage or in their relationship. But what they find now is that that thing is actually a strength, that they are meant to help people. They are meant to feel big emotions, to help other people, feel normal, or to get through things. And that's actually a strength. And then I have some people who are very decisive right now. And maybe that was seen as a point of contention in their relationships, that they were very decisive and they were with somebody who might not have seen that decisiveness as a strength. So the person would decide and they would stick with that. And their former partner, wouldn't see that as a positive. So they stopped being so decisive. They became a bit more indecisive. They started questioning themselves. And what happens is that once you start questioning yourself, the decisions that you make are based out of fear, and they are based out of confusion, instead of being based out of truth and out of love. And when you get to a point where you are making decisions based out of fear and confusion, you're operating out of a deficit mindset. So you're kind of trying to prevent things from happening. You're trying to prevent bad things. You're trying to avoid negative emotions or negative feelings. You're trying to make sure that things don't run out. You're trying to keep really tight hold of what you have. But once you stop and take a moment and realize that you're trying to hold so tightly to these things, you realize that when your fists are trying to control it, there's not much room for them to hold anything new. So a big part of what happens is that we get into that deficit mindset. We get into this place that we're trying to hold on to what we had. And we realize that the only way to get new things is to open our hands, let go of some of that control, and let new things come in. And then you can choose. You can see what the new thing is and decide whether or not you want to keep it or let it go. And when you're operating out of an abundance mindset, you realize that letting something go doesn't mean that you're never going to get anything back again. It just means that you're realizing and choosing that that thing isn't what's best for you. So then you can put it down and wait for or work for the next thing. And I think that when we're able to operate with that and we're able to validate ourselves, that's how we start redefining the relationship that we have with ourselves, that we are able to really start giving ourselves those things that we missed out on, even from childhood. A big thing that I talked to there, Bluey is a huge kids show. And there's this episode where Bluey and Bingo are playing with a friend, and the dad is being an octopus. And then, they're having fun. The three kids are having fun. And then the friend goes back to her house and she tries playing the octopus game with her dad. And, the kid would start to play, and the dad would be like, oh, that's not how an octopus is. And the kid would get kind of sad. And then the dad would try something, and the kid would be like, oh, well, no, that's not what an octopus does. And this went back and forth, right? They kept telling the other, the dad would tell the daughter, and the daughter would tell the dad, like, oh, that's just not what an octopus does, to the point where the game wasn't fun anymore. And they both stopped playing. And the dad went to work, and the kid sat down, and she was sad. And after a minute, she goes over to the dad who's, working. And it turns out he wasn't actually working. He was looking up facts about octopus or octopi. And what it turns out is that, he started telling her some things about octopus. And what she was like, well, yeah, I like that. And I appreciate that. And they would learn that different octopus do different things. So he was able to teach her a little bit, but then they came up with a new rule, right? They came up with this new rule that whenever they would play and somebody would do something that an octopus would or wouldn't do, they'd be like, you know what, that's okay, this octopus can. And I think that a big part of redefining your relationship with yourself is taking that same idea and applying it to yourself. It's like, okay, you know, parents aren't supposed to do this, or women aren't supposed to do this, or men aren't supposed to do this, or providers aren't supposed to do this, but like I can. And that's not if you're hurting somebody, that's not if you're doing something wrong. It's literally just the things about you that make you who you are. A lot of those things are the exact same things that we were, talked down to about, or we were chastised for, or, as kids that, our parents gave us a hard time for, and then our partners might have given us a hard time for those things, and we've tried to hide those things, and we've tried to soften the blow when it comes to other people. But what you need to start telling yourself, and what you can start telling yourself, is like, I'm an empathetic person, and that's okay. Like, for me, I'm a chaotic creator, and that's okay. I can try my best to be type A, and I will get crappy results. Or I can tell myself, I'm more type B, which I don't like saying. So I'm more chaotically creative, and that's okay. My kids are able to, run around and be crazy, and that's okay. I don't need my kids to be like perfect and well behaved and quiet all the time. We have fun, we get dirty, and that's okay. And especially when it comes to things about yourself, you don't have to start out with saying, oh, I'm likable, I'm lovable. You can really start with, hey, I'm okay, and that's what matters. Okay. And then when you get to the idea of redefining your relationship with your kids, this one takes a bit of work, because you're going from, whether or not it was a healthy relationship, you're going from a household where they had two parents, and now you're doing this on your own. And what it takes is self-awareness. What it takes is an ability to go through things and reflect, and really understand why you do the things that you do, and like, what are the motivations. And this is where abundance versus scarcity mindset come up again, because when you operate out of a scarcity mindset or deficit mindset, you're wanting to prevent your kids from doing things, or especially in divorce or separation, you're trying to prevent them from feeling the emotions that come with the separation, or you're trying to prevent them from making the same mistakes that you made in relationships, or lead the same life that you did, if you feel like you made mistakes that you don't want your kids to make. And what you can do to start redefining that relationship with your kids is, again, to not look for the bad, because when we look for the bad, we will continue to see more and more bad. Like, it's one of those things that when you look for it, you'll find it. So if you're looking for things that are going to go wrong, if you look for the things that your kids are doing wrong, or the ways that they're misbehaving, the ways that they're not listening, you'll continue to find those things. And when we're a single parent, we can't look for those bad things, because life is already exhausting enough. And we can't continue to look for more bad things. So what happens when you redefine the relationship with your kids is that, especially as single parents, we need to be a lot more collaborative with our kids, and we need to include them in what's happening, and in decisions that are made, and in the ways that that they are disciplined, and the way that we model things for them. Because what happens a lot, especially kids 3, 4, 5, 6, is that they ask why do I have to do that? Why is this happening? Why is that happening? Especially around a divorce or separation. Why is this, or why is that? And the reason, and the major way that we start redefining that relationship, is that we don't have to have all of the answers. And most of the time we don't have many of the answers, right? We're still trying to figure this out for ourselves. We're still trying to figure out where the relationship really started to go wrong, or we're trying to figure out how to live life now that we are single parents. We're trying to figure out how to talk about this in a age appropriate way. And I think that for this, redefining the relationship means including your kids in that process, and finding out how they feel, finding out what they feel, and asking them questions too. Because there was a client that I had that he had separated from his child's mother, and his kid asked him, like, hey, Daddy, how come you don't love mommy anymore? And I think that's the question that a lot of us have heard And then, he said it hit him kind of hard. And he was like, well, I do love mommy. We're just not together anymore. And what can happen as parents is that we really try to solve, and we try to fix, and we try to get to a point where, like, that the question is answered. But what we talked about afterwards was this idea that we don't know, him and we did not know what his daughter meant by love. So something as simple as, like, why don't you love mommy anymore? To her, she sees like Disney shows and movies, and to her, um, love might be like kissing, hugging, things that she can see, right? So by just simply answering the question, he might have been missing an opportunity to really dive deeper into that. So when it comes to when your kids have those tougher questions, it really comes down to this idea of, can you ask them a question to kind of see what they mean? Because if you would have asked her what love means, then she could have given him more to go on, and then they could have had a discussion about it instead of she asks a question and then he has an answer. So when I say redefine the relationship with your kids, we don't need to see ourselves as like the person with all of the answers. Because in this situation, none of us have done this before. None of us planned to be here. And it's okay to not have the answers. It's okay not to know it all. And for us and for our kids, a big part of the redefining is to figure it out together. And I think that that can be a powerful shift. And then lastly, this idea of redefining the relationship with your co-parents. One of the biggest things that happens that I see that people run into problems with is they don't ever finish the breakup. And I know that sounds interesting and it sounds weird. We don't finish the breakup because if you broke up with somebody else that you did not have kids with, there's a way that you would do that, and you would likely cut off ties, and you would likely not respond when they reached out, unless there was an emergency. And I think that even that you'd have the choice to, whether or not you wanted to respond. And I think that what happens with relationships that have kids involved, whether it's marriage, whether it's, dating, what have you, is this idea that we have to get along for the kids' sake, or we have to like each other for the kids' sake. And I think that puts an unfair amount of pressure on making sure that the new relationship, the co-parenting relationship, is healthy. So what I mean by breaking or completing the breakup is this idea that boundaries are going to be your best friend. Boundaries are going to be such an impactful way to keep yourself healthy and keep yourself in a good headspace. And one of the biggest things that can happen is telling the other person that they, like, outside of an emergency, that they don't have access to you anymore. That means that they can't just show up whenever they want. That means they can't just call whenever they want, because for some people, that's a boundary that's incredibly needed. There might still be hurt. There might still be pain. There might still be process or emotions that you have not processed. So if that person has access to you and they can get to you whenever they want, they're not going to know that that might still cause pain and that might still cause turmoil. So creating a boundary of like, hey, unless it's an emergency, you don't have access to me unless I give it to you, can be a very powerful way to really like create new boundaries. And further than that, like, what can really happen is we can trick ourselves into thinking that we need to bend over backwards for this person, or that we need to really do whatever it takes to keep the friendship. And this will be a process. For me personally, where I was at, 5 or 6 years ago in my co-parenting relationship versus where I'm at now, we've gotten a lot better off, and we don't communicate nearly as much as we used to, because what would happen is that the more we would communicate, the more potential there was that we would have an argument, or we would have a disagreement, and then that would impact each of our time with the kids. And what I mean by that is the fact that like if her and I got into an argument when I had the kids, then I would be one, I would be distracted while the kids were with me. Two, I would get done with the argument and I'd be upset, and the kids would be able to feel that. And then three, I would like that would stay with me, and I would really let that impact any future conversations that we had together. So what happened is that we would be trying to figure out how to do it together. We would be trying to figure out how to, you know, and me personally, one thing that I had to really let go of was trying to control, because we had different styles of parenting. We had different styles of structure and different styles of routine. And I felt like hers wasn't beneficial. And let me pull this back. I'll get to questions in just a couple of minutes. And I think that for me, letting go of some of that control of needing her to do things the way I did them, or needing her to understand why I did them, or at least explain to me why she's doing things her way. It was just this like want for control. And I never got it. Like that, that was the thing, right? And that's the thing I talk to parents about now, is that no matter how hard you try, no matter what you try, you're never going to get that control. And what actually happens is that that lack of control can lead to frustration and can lead to resentment. But when you want that control, what you're really not doing is trusting. And while it won't ever be easy, trusting that your kids are going to be okay with the other parents helps them out. It's going to be supportive of them. And it's a way to show that support without there needing to be like daily texting or daily check-ins or communicating that leads to arguments, because the relationship is going to shift. And in order to have that shift, you've really got to cut clear boundaries and really do the hard work. Because just like when you set boundaries with your kids, when you set boundaries with your co-parent, there's going to be pushback. But one of the best things you can do is hold firm in those when you know that you're doing the right move for yourself, because your co-parent is going to end up respecting the fact that you set those boundaries and hold them much more than if you try to set those boundaries and then you give in. It's very hard for somebody to respect when a boundary is set and then the person gives in. And then that's just going to lead to that person pushing for more and crossing boundaries more often, because you're showing them that the boundary that you set, you don't have respect for. So why would they respect it? But going to that question, let me see if I can pull it back up. So Deborah asked, she's divorced and said that she has a boyfriend recently, but it hasn't worked out. But I struggle with the best reason to give your kids for the breakup, because they ask why and want to know why I chose to end it. So you could play it down, just say that he's away working until they hopefully forget about him, or tell them the real reasons. So personally, I'm going to support the idea of telling your kids the truth at age appropriate levels. So, I've been through breakups myself, and, one of the things that I've said is, her name. So she and I decided not to be together because we wanted different things in the future. And to me, that opens up the conversation. That opens up the conversation of like, all right, well, what do you want in the future? And then what did she want? And I think that allows kids to have a much more clear understanding of what a relationship is and can be, versus the Disney version that, doesn't really give clear and healthy understandings. So to me, there's a level of like, if something bad or traumatic happened, not to share those details, but if it's like, we just decided that we didn't work, or we wanted different things, or, maybe they cheated. I think that there's a level of telling those things at age appropriate times, because hoping that a kid just forgets about something is kind of selling your kid short. It's this idea that like, hey, I don't think that you can handle this, so I'm going to keep it from you. When the best thing you can do is really allow them the opportunity to process it, ask questions, and get through it. That way it doesn't come up later on when you're not expecting it and you're not ready for it. And then how do you approach the subject of boundaries? I'm incredibly nervous about addressing anything because I got such a bashing. Um, so I think that is the idea of there is going to be pushback. Whenever you set a boundary, like, the big thing that I talk about is when your kid asks for a cookie 10 minutes before dinner, you set the boundary that no, like, feel free to have a cookie after dinner, and if you hold that boundary, they're not going to be like, oh, thanks, mom. Thanks, dad. I'm so glad that you're setting this boundary for me. I'm really glad that I don't get to have this cookie. No, no. Like, when we set boundaries for people that they want or they're expecting or that they have their own expectations, they're not going to gladly take that and go away with it. A kid who asks for a cookie before dinner sometimes will be like, well, no, I want it now. I'm hungry. I'm this or that. And you can give justifications like, oh, we're going to have dinner in 10 minutes. It's going to be good. I'm cooking your favorites, all these things. But once you set the boundary, anything that you do beyond that is just justification. And if you go back and look at any argument or any bashing that happened, chances are that it was the justification that they used to bash. And what I mean by that is a simple one is that I've helped parents deal with is FaceTiming the kiddo when you have the kiddo and the other parent wants to FaceTime. And so what I help people set up is like, by 7 p.m., it's too late to FaceTime because we're going to try to be in our bedtime routine by 7:30. So the boundary would be, feel free to call, or feel free to text me when you're ready to call. Anytime before 7 p.m. is great. And then if they call after 7 p.m., you don't have to answer. You don't have to pick it up. You have to pick it up and say, hey, it's past 7:30 or it's past 7 p.m. We can't talk right now. You've already set the boundary, so you can just let the action speak for itself. And then the next time, if you talk to them, it's like, oh, you don't let me see the kid. You don't let me talk. You don't do this. You don't do that. You're so terrible. You'd be like, well, what is preventing you from, all right, I hear that you're upset. What is preventing you from calling earlier in the day? Well, I work, I do this, I do that. I can't. You're like, well, what is preventing you from calling at a different time during the day? And what can happen is that when I like to say, go brain dead and give the same response over and over, especially once it's a rational, like we take the emotion out of it. It's not like, oh, you're so terrible. Why can't you call earlier? It's like, hey, I can tell that you're upset. What's preventing you from calling earlier? Until they get to a point where they're able to answer and give you actual reason why they're not able to call earlier in the day, then what they're doing is they're just working for a fight. They're just working to see if they can get to you. And what you can do, and one of the best things you can do, is you can start taking the buttons away, is that your co-parent probably knows maybe as good as, if not better than anybody else, except maybe your kids, how to press your buttons, right? They've learned them, they know them. So they know how to press the buttons, whether it's something about the kid, whether it's something about you as a parent, whether it's something about your parents or your family, they will keep working till they get it. So if you keep engaging by it's similar to, okay, you've gotten your kid, you've managed through the cookie boundary setting, and now you set the food down. They're like, I'm not gonna eat this. This looks gross. This is terrible. And you start justifying it. You're like, you know what? This is what's for dinner. And you can leave it there. But what happens a lot of times is that we justify it. We're like, well, I spent an hour cooking this. This is healthy for you. This is good for you. You need to eat for your energy. And what your kid starts to do is that they start to pick at those justifications. They don't care that this is what's for dinner. They've heard you justify it, and they'll start attacking the justifications. And then what gets lost is that they still have to make the choice of whether they're going to eat or not. And what they're hoping for is that they can make enough noise and get you rattled enough that you'll end up just making up something else instead. And that is exactly what your co-parent is doing. Your co-parent is going to bash, or they're going to make enough noise that hopefully they can get you rattled enough that whatever your original thought was, what your original decision was, what the original boundary was, gets lost in the noise. So the best thing you can do is to set that boundary stick to it and then just go brain dead and give similar responses or stop responding until they actually come up with a plan, hear what you're saying, or like respond with something that actually fits to what the original decision was. Because one of the biggest things is that they will just huff and puff and try to blow the house down. But a good boundary is a house made of bricks, and it's going to be really hard to blow down. Welcome. Okay, so I'm going to say back to you what I understand the issue and the question to be, and then we can make sure we're on the same page. So it sounds like that from your medical condition or health condition that you would like to be more independent through this divorce, but it's hard to be consistently dependent on yourself. So then it's needed to have him involved in the situation so that you can work, or if something comes up health-wise, that you'll need somebody to take care of your kid or kids. Is that accurate?
Yes, I'm much better now, health-wise, but I fall sick easily. Not just say, oh, we email each other the plan of the week or the month, this day, this time, and that's it. Because changes are daily.
So I think that for that, it would just, the boundary then is going to look different than somebody else's boundary. So it might not be, every Tuesday and every Thursday he has the kiddo, and you count on that no matter what. It's more along the lines of like, if we're going to be more fluid, what do I need to do to check in to see where you're at? And I think that way you can kind of protect yourself, because what it sounds like is that you just don't like relying on him, but don't feel like you have another choice.
Yeah.
Would that be accurate?
That's correct.
Okay. So that's not necessarily a boundary issue then, because in that case, if you're going through with this divorce, if you're going through with the separation, the courts are going to give you boundaries, right? Whether that's time spent, whether that's, how this is going to shake out. So sooner or later, you're going to have to figure out what to do with the kid when you have them, and you have to make the decision if you want it to be, dad to be the one, or if there's another way to make it work. Like I think that what I hear is something worth unpacking. That would be like, what is the relationship between you and him that could be worked on so that it doesn't feel negative for him to have to watch his own kid? Because I think that where I'm at is that there's a way that this would work out, that there should, like, if the kiddo is with you or with dad, I think I'm missing the part where it needs to be more structured.
Because I am the one who wants to put the boundaries, not to call each other's only if it's necessary and minimal. But I am always the one who has to make that call, and so I feel I'm breaking my own boundaries.
So I think that, to me, the place to look at is like, why are you trying to set the boundary of not calling or not having communications if you know that you'll need to?
Okay.
Because to me, that's where the rub is going to be, and that's where like the discord is going to be, is because I can't set a boundary if I know I'm going to break it, because then that's just diminishing the respect I should be commanding. Like, and not to like it like rigid thing, like I said this, so I'm like, boundaries can be fluid, boundaries can be like flexible. But I think that in this case, it sounds like there's a reason you're trying to minimize the contact and minimize the communication. And that's different than setting a boundary when it comes to like who's gonna be watching the kiddo. There's a difference between a boundary and controlling what the other person does. And like a boundary can't be contingent on the other person. Like a boundary isn't, you need to tell me this if our son eats something, you need to tell me. Like that's not a boundary, that's an expectation. And those are going to be two different things. So a boundary is like, if you want to come over and see the kiddo, shoot me a text first. That way, if they would come over without you telling them, then you would just like not need to open the door. But if it's like, if you're setting the expectation that that they need to tell you if the diet changes or the son throws up, that's an expectation of what's to happen. So those are gonna be two different things. A boundary is like more based on what we can do and what we have control over, and an expectation is going to be based off of like what we want them to do, but then they have the choice, because we can't control them, whether or not they meet that expectation. So to me, there's a level of, we can't control what we can't control, and we cannot control our co-parent. So if we try to set up boundaries to manage what they do and to control what they do, we're going to be disappointed, we're going to be stressed out, and it's going to lead to resentment, and it's going to feel like we're getting further apart, when a boundary is more like setting up times to meet, setting up where things are going to be. Like it's like with the access of like, you don't have access to me unless it's an emergency. So even going back to the idea of the boundary around, like you're setting the boundary, but then you're the one breaking it. I think that this is more of like an expectation. Okay. And like that shift is going to help a bit, because like our expectations and their expectations aren't going to be the same always. So having that healthy communication when neither one of you is emotionally triggered is going to be huge too. Like going to him and be like, hey, I can't always predict when I'm going to feel sick or when I'm going to need the help. Like, are you willing to help when I need that?
Yeah.
I think that's really helpful, talking about kind of boundaries versus expectations. I think that's definitely a really helpful kind of way of looking at it from two different sides. Kind of on a good link, someone's just asked a question. I know that kids thrive on boundaries, but is it bad if they have too many and not enough free reign?
Okay, so sometimes I feel like I'm telling them constantly what to do and giving them the message that they must listen to me. So I think that a big part of that really comes down to control. Again, like to me, I don't know how old these kids are, but at a very early age, from like the age of 2, my kids get choices. Like say we're getting ready in the morning. Do you want like the blue cup or the red cup? Do you want to eat toast or do you want to eat Pop-Tarts? And it's just this idea that control for a lot of us is more illusion than reality. So kids just want a little bit of that illusion of control. They don't want to be told what to do all of the time, in the same way that I don't want to be told what to do at work all of the time. If I have a boss or a manager who is constantly micromanaging me or constantly telling me that I'm not getting something right, I'm going to work less hard for that person. I'm going to have resentment, and I'm going to have a harder time buying in. But if they're like, hey, Jay, I could really use your help figuring this out, or if they let me in on some of the decision making, I'm going to buy into what they're wanting more. And that's what I meant, like when you have to redefine the relationship between you and your kids, is it needs to be a lot more collaborative when you're a single parent, because when they ask why, you don't have backup. You don't have somebody else that's just is going to come and say like, hey, listen to your mom, listen to your dad. You're going to have the reasoning behind why they need to do that. So then you also need to self-check and make sure that you're not like using because I said so. Like if there's not a good reason for why your kids need to do that thing, then it's going to be really tricky to get them to do it. And then I think there might have been one about my son's dad is constantly struggling with my boundary setting. I have 2 gray rocks. So I think the gray rocking is a lot like that idea, like going brain dead, of just like giving the same response or giving no response, because a lot of times there's a very clear connection between an adult that we are separating from and a toddler that we are raising. And in a lot of ways, they'll respond to boundaries and to structure the same way, in the sense that they will give pushback. But just like that toddler or that kid that is asking for a cookie before dinner, if they ask for a cookie before dinner and you say no, and then the next day you say no again, but then on the third day you say yes, they're going to know that there's a chance, and they're going to continue to ask for that cookie, and they're not going to give up. And the same way that setting that boundary with the child's other parent, if you set the boundary and keep it, set the boundary and keep it, but then on the third time you set the boundary and then give in, it's going to give them, whether it's right or wrong, fair or not, it's going to give them the motivation that there's a chance that you'll give in. And that's just going to keep them coming back and trying to push back for more until they get you to give in. And it's, it's one of those things that, stonewalling, gray rocking, or going brain dead is just this idea of, so 10 calls, the boundary was setting a pickup time and payment of nursery fee contributions. And those are important things that you have to communicate on. But like I said earlier, a lot of times you can let me know in the comments, but like, I would imagine a lot of what they talked about after, like in their shouty calls, wasn't about the actual time. It was probably like anything else that they could kind of sink their teeth into. And that's what's hard, because at that point, it's hard not to get emotionally triggered, and it's hard not to emotionally respond. But that's what it means by gray rocking. It's like, you just have to take your emotions out of it as best as possible. And whether that's, talking to a friend, whether that's screaming into a pillow, whether that is doing something to let those emotions out, the best thing you can do is direct those emotions somewhere else besides in the conversation with your co-parent. Because once you get caught up in that emotion, they realize that they're getting that reaction that they wanted. And it's going to make them motivated to continue to try to do that thing to get you like off. And so I think that, right. And I think that even threatening, a big threat is, to be taken back to court, or to, change the surname. And just like, with the kid, a kid's going to say, hey, you're a mean mommy, you're a mean dad, if they don't give you what you want, or you don't give them what they want. And in a similar way, the threats just seem scary when they come from a co-parent, because we're scared of what could happen, and we're scared of, what if they actually went through with it. But when you keep on the path that is right, and when you come from that idea of like, you're doing what's best, those threats, you find out just how empty they are, and just how much, like, once you put your foot down and keep it down, that the more you can emotionally be unattached, like the less scary those things become.
I think that's brilliant advice. Thank you so much. I think that is all of the questions that we've had in the chat, which is brilliant. And that is absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for your time, Jay, and all of your advice. We've had some lovely comments with people saying thank you, saying they're really enjoying it. We've had some comments on the app of people just saying they're just listening quietly with their mics off and their cameras off, but they're really enjoying all the information.
Yeah, well, thank you. This was a pleasure to be on here with you.